Have you ever felt that moment when your entire world shifts beneath your feet? When betrayal doesn't just knock at the door, but storms in and shatters everything you thought was secure? This isn't a story you read in fiction. It happened to me, and every second of it is etched in my memory. But before I begin, I have to ask, where are you watching this from? Pause and think for a second, because what I'm about to share is a story of trust, strategy, and consequences that could happen to anyone. And today, I want you to see it through my eyes. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in my office. Papers were neatly stacked on my desk, and the faint hum of computers and soft chatter around me. Then the door opened, and in walked a man I hadn't seen before. Tall, sharp-dressed, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. His presence demanded attention, and I immediately knew this wasn't a routine visit. "Albert?" he asked, calm yet firm. "Yes?" I replied, keeping my pulse steady. "I'm Mr. Whitman," he said, setting the briefcase down and carefully extracting a manila envelope. "Your wife, Catherine, instructed me to deliver these documents to you." And there it was, divorce papers. Cold, official, and tearing through me like a cold wind in the dead of winter. For a moment, time seemed to slow. My colleagues glanced up. Whispers filled the air, but I stayed calm. I didn't flinch, didn't speak. I leaned back, took a deep breath, and allowed a small, controlled smile to appear on my face. Because the truth is, Catherine had no idea I had already anticipated her moves. Late-night calls, sudden business trips, distant glances, all of it noted, all of it accounted for. Unlike her, I had a plan. From my drawer I retrieved a black envelope I had prepared weeks earlier for this very moment. I handed it to Mr. Whitman, my voice steady, almost casual. "Give this to Catherine. She'll want to see it immediately." He raised an eyebrow, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "And what's inside?" "Something," I said calmly, "that will make her rethink every single action she's taken." The tension in the room was palpable. My colleagues tried to hide their curiosity, but Mr. Whitman left with the envelope, likely thinking he had delivered a victory. But in reality, he had only set the first domino in motion, one that would topple all of Catherine's carefully constructed plans. I took a deep breath, letting the adrenaline settle. I knew this was more than just a legal matter, it was personal. The betrayal ran deep, but it ignited a fire inside me. A fire of patience, strategy, and the calm execution of justice. Later I called my closest friend, Lucas. "It's done," I said. He didn't ask questions. He already understood. "Good," Lucas replied, voice calm but charged with excitement. "Remember, Albert, she thinks she's won, but the game has already shifted." I spent the rest of the evening reflecting on the years we had shared, the trust I had placed, and the sudden betrayal that threatened to dismantle everything. And then it hit me. This isn't about revenge. This is about justice. And sometimes justice requires patience. I, Albert, share this story with you not just as a recounting of betrayal, but as a lesson in foresight, strategy, and staying one step ahead. The envelope I handed to Mr. Whitman wasn't just paper and ink. It was the first move in a carefully planned sequence. Catherine thought she could shock me, catch me off guard, but she didn't know I had seen every step coming. Every lie, every secret, meticulously recorded. That night, as I sat in my dimly lit office, the city lights faintly glimmering through the window, I smiled quietly to myself. Control was back in my hands, and the coming days would make it clear how crucial it is to stay one step ahead. This is just the beginning. The next morning I arrived at my office earlier than usual. My mind was a storm of anticipation and careful calculation. Catherine had no idea that the envelope I handed to Mr. Whitman would begin a chain reaction she would never see coming. Every step she had planned, every maneuver she thought was secret, was now under my quiet observation. As I sipped my black coffee, I reflected on the past few weeks. Catherine had grown distant, cold, and increasingly secretive. I had noticed the late-night calls she tried to hide, the suspicious withdrawals from our joint accounts, and the subtle changes in her demeanor. But unlike her, I had foresight and I had patience. I knew the importance of timing. Around 10 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Mr. Whitman. "Albert," he said, his voice controlled, "Catherine has received the envelope. She's reviewing it. And, well, I must say, she's taken aback." I smiled faintly, swirling the coffee in my cup. "I hope she finds it enlightening. That's one way to put it," Whitman replied. She didn't expect this, not at all. And frankly, it's changing her approach already. I ended the call, allowing the quiet thrill of victory to wash over me. But I knew the real test was still to come. Catherine wasn't someone to admit defeat easily. She would test every boundary, every reaction, and I needed to remain calm, precise, and observant. By late morning, I received an unexpected visitor. Lucas, my oldest and closest friend. "Everything's moving, Albert." "You've set the perfect trap," he said, handing me a folder with additional information I had requested weeks ago. "She thinks she's controlling the narrative, but the truth is, we've already written the ending." The folder contained copies of every transaction, every secret plan, every minor detail Catherine thought she had hidden. It was a roadmap, one that would ensure I stayed one step ahead. I looked at the files and felt a sense of clarity wash over me. As the hours passed, I noticed subtle changes. Catherine called more frequently, trying to gauge my reaction, but I remained unreadable. She arranged meetings, discussions, even subtle threats, but none of them rattled me. Each attempt was meticulously catalogued. Each call is recorded. Each gesture was noted. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Whitman called again. "Albert, she wants to meet tomorrow. She's demanding answers, explanations. She's worried." I leaned back in my chair, eyes narrowing slightly. "Good, let her come. The stage is set, and she's about to see how miscalculations can unravel even the most carefully plotted schemes." By evening, I returned home to a quiet house. The city lights reflected off the polished floors, and I allowed myself a small, private smile. I had prepared everything. The envelope, the records, the witnesses, every piece of the puzzle was ready to fall into place. Sitting alone, I reviewed the documents one last time. My hands moved deliberately, flipping pages, cross-referencing details, ensuring that nothing was left to chance. And then I thought about the conversation that would unfold tomorrow. Catherine would arrive, expecting tension, anger, and desperation. Instead, she would find strategy, calm, and evidence. That night, I wrote a brief note to accompany her inevitable confrontation. Just a few words, carefully chosen, designed to communicate a single undeniable truth. "I am ready, and I know everything." As I placed the note on the kitchen counter, I couldn't help but think back to the early days of our marriage, the trust, the laughter, the shared dreams. Somewhere along the way, betrayal had crept in, subtle and quiet, but unmistakable. And now it would meet its match. Before bed, I asked myself one question. Would I have reacted differently if I hadn't anticipated her moves? The answer was simple: yes, I would have been blind. But foresight changes everything. Patience changes everything. And planning changes outcomes that seem inevitable. I turned off the lights and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Somewhere below, the world moved as usual, oblivious to the personal storm brewing within our family. But soon that storm would arrive, and when it did, Catherine would realize that control had shifted quietly, decisively, and irrevocably. As I lay in bed, I allowed a single thought to settle in my mind. The game has only just begun. Tomorrow, she would face reality. Tomorrow, she would understand that underestimating someone with foresight can be the gravest mistake of all. And so, the night passed quietly, deceptively calm, with the faint thrill of anticipation lingering in the air. Because sometimes, The quietest moments are the ones that precede the most dramatic revelations. The next morning, the city felt unusually quiet, almost as if the world itself knew that something was about to unfold. I arrived at my office, walking past the familiar cubicles and muted chatter, yet my mind was elsewhere. Catherine's impending visit weighed heavily on me, but I reminded myself patience, precision, and calm observation were my greatest allies. I settled at my desk, spreading the documents I had meticulously organized. Every phone call, every suspicious transaction, every veiled attempt to mislead me, it was all there, laid bare. I reviewed the records once more, making mental notes of the order in which each piece of evidence would be revealed. This wasn't just about defending myself. It was about ensuring she grasped the magnitude of her miscalculations. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. It was Lucas, my closest friend, and the one person who knew the full extent of my strategy. "Albert, she's calling again," Lucas said. "I can tell she's trying to intimidate you, but remember, keep calm. Let her reveal herself. Let her show you her hand." "I know," I replied quietly, staring at the line of papers before me. "I've anticipated every move. Now it's about timing." The hours dragged slowly, each tick of the clock heightening the tension in the room. Every email ping, every phone ring felt like a signal. And then it came, a notification. Catherine's arrival was imminent. I could feel the shift in energy before I even saw her. When the door finally opened, she walked in with a composed exterior, her expression carefully controlled, but I could sense the tension in her steps. She tried to mask it with a faint smile, a gesture that belied the storm she carried inside. "Catherine," I said, finally breaking the silence, "please have a seat." My tone was calm, almost disarming, but there was an unmistakable firmness underlying every word. She hesitated, then sat across from me, her eyes darting nervously at the organized stack of documents. She had expected confrontation, perhaps anger, pleading. Instead, she found focus, preparation, and quiet authority. I began slowly. "You've made several decisions over the past few weeks. Actions that you thought were secret. But they weren't. Everything is documented." I tapped the top of the folder lightly. "Every transaction, every plan, it's all here." Her composure flickered briefly. "Albert, I didn't think..." She stammered. I let her struggle with the words, the hesitation working in my favor. "Catherine, the envelope I handed to Mr. Whitman was only the beginning. It contained the first pieces of evidence he would need to understand the full context of our situation." Her eyes widened slightly, betraying the realization dawning on her. I could see the internal panic she tried desperately to suppress, and I continued. "Before you even think to react, let me clarify something. I've anticipated the next moves, the counter-arguments, and yes, even your attempts to sway the situation in your favor." Her hands trembled faintly as she reached for her purse, perhaps for a document or her phone. I shook my head slightly, a quiet signal that her attempts would be futile. "This," I said, holding up a specific document, "is a record of your recent actions. The ones you thought I would never notice. The ones you believed were hidden. They are now part of the conversation, Catherine. And every detail matters." Her lips pressed into a thin line. She knew the walls were closing in, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear. Not just anger, not just frustration, but the understanding that she had underestimated me completely. I leaned back, allowing a small, deliberate pause. "This isn't about revenge for the sake of anger. It's about accountability, Catherine. It's about understanding that actions have consequences, and that underestimating someone with foresight can be catastrophic." For the next hour, she attempted various justifications, subtle deflections, and appeals to emotion. But I remained unshaken, countering each with calm clarity and documented proof. Lucas's advice echoed in my mind. Let her reveal herself. Let her make every mistake openly. And she did, piece by piece, argument by argument, until the room was heavy with the weight of undeniable truth. By the end of our conversation, Catherine sat silently, her once confident demeanor replaced with quiet resignation. She realized fully that the game she had tried to control was no longer hers to command. As she stood to leave, I offered no further words, only a measured look. It conveyed everything: the patience, the observation, the preparation, and ultimately the victory. And as the door clicked shut behind her, I allowed myself a slow, deep breath. The confrontation had passed, but the lessons lingered. Foresight, patience, and precise planning would always outmaneuver hasty, impulsive decisions. Tomorrow, the court will hear the documents, the evidence, and the undeniable facts. But for now, I savored the quiet triumph of being one step ahead. The morning sunlight spilled through the office windows, but it brought no warmth to the situation at hand. Catherine's departure left a lingering tension, one that hung in the air like an invisible storm cloud. I could still feel the residue of her fear, the weight of understanding she was no longer in control. But there was no time to bask in temporary satisfaction. The next steps demanded precision and foresight. I sat back in my chair, reviewing the documents once more. Every single page had been carefully compiled over the past weeks, a silent arsenal waiting for the courtroom battlefield. I had traced financial discrepancies, noted inconsistencies in statements, and recorded moments of manipulation. The smallest detail, I knew, could turn the tide entirely in my favor. My phone vibrated gently on the desk. Lucas's name flashed on the screen. He had been keeping a close watch, ready to assist in any unexpected move. I answered, my voice calm but firm. "Albert, she's talking to her lawyer now," Lucas said, almost in a whisper. "Be ready. I think she realizes she's underestimated you, but I'm not sure she knows how deep your strategy goes." "I know," I replied, "and that's exactly why I've set everything in motion. Today, nothing can derail what we've meticulously prepared." I spent the next few hours double-checking evidence, confirming timelines, and reviewing my strategy for court. Each item was arranged logically, ensuring that the narrative would be undeniable. Preparation wasn't just about the facts. It was about psychological precision. Every move Catherine thought she was making in secret had already been anticipated. By late afternoon, Catherine reappeared at my office, this time escorted by Mr. Whitman, her lawyer. She maintained a controlled expression, but the slight quiver in her hands betrayed the anxiety she was feeling. Mr. Whitman, confident as ever, strode in with papers in hand, clearly expecting a combative session. "Catherine, Mr. Whitman," I greeted, keeping my tone neutral. "Please have a seat. I believe we have much to discuss before heading to court tomorrow." Catherine's eyes flicked to the organized stack of documents on my desk. For a moment she hesitated, realizing the environment was no longer neutral. The room itself seemed to emphasize my preparedness, each folder and record silently declaring that the battle ahead had already been studied, analyzed, and planned. Mr. Whitman opened with his usual formal tone. "Albert, we are here to negotiate, not to escalate. Catherine wishes to resolve matters amicably." I let his words hang in the air, nodding slightly. "Of course," I said, "but first let's review the documents she's already familiar with, the evidence of her actions over the past months. I believe it's important for everyone to understand the full context." What followed was a meticulous walkthrough of events. Each detail I presented dismantled the illusions Catherine had created. Her subtle manipulations, minor financial adjustments, and attempts at misdirection, all revealed with calm, unflinching clarity, were documented and undeniable. As I moved through the evidence, I noticed the subtle signs of panic growing in Catherine's demeanor. She tried to interject, tried to explain away actions, but I countered each argument with cold facts. Even Mr. Whitman's confidence wavered slightly. The courtroom battles he had fought in his career had not prepared him for a client who had underestimated her own spouse's strategic foresight. Hours passed like minutes. The room's atmosphere thickened with tension, the weight of truth pressing heavily against every lie and miscalculation. By the end, Catherine was visibly shaken, her carefully constructed persona unraveling. Finally, I leaned back in my chair and spoke calmly. "Catherine, this isn't about revenge for anger's sake. It's about accountability. It's about understanding that every decision has consequences, and underestimating someone who prepares with patience and strategy is a mistake you cannot recover from." Her lips parted slightly. Words caught in her throat, the truth she had hoped to avoid now undeniably visible. Mr. Whitman collected himself and nodded subtly, clearly recognizing the inevitability of the situation. As they left, I felt a quiet sense of victory, not loud, not celebratory, but a profound awareness that the first phase of preparation had been executed flawlessly. Tomorrow, the court would witness the evidence, and Catherine would finally understand the magnitude of her miscalculation. Sitting alone in the office, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Strategy, foresight, and patience had won the first battle, but the war wasn't over. I reviewed my notes once more, readying myself for the courtroom. Confident that every step had been planned, every detail anticipated, and every potential misstep already accounted for, I looked at the evening sky, the fading light casting long shadows across the office. The anticipation of tomorrow's confrontation was a strange mix of anxiety and calm satisfaction. Preparation, after all, is the key to victory, and I had mastered it. The next morning, the sun rose as if nothing extraordinary was about to happen, but inside, the tension was palpable. I had reviewed every detail again, ensuring that nothing could be used against me. My preparations were meticulous, down to the very last note, every paper and document arranged to present a story of truth and clarity that would leave no room for deception. Lucas called early, as usual, checking to make sure all angles were covered. "Albert, everything's set. I double-checked the financial records, the emails, the dates. Nothing is missing." "Good," I said calmly, though my mind raced with every possible scenario Catherine and Mr. Whitman might try. We can't afford even a single oversight. Today, we execute with precision. By mid-morning, Mr. Whitman arrived at my office carrying his usual air of confidence. He probably assumed the day would go as he intended, but the look on his face shifted slightly when he saw the neatly arranged stack of evidence. Catherine followed him, attempting composure, though her hands betrayed the tension she felt. "Catherine, Mr. Whitman," I greeted them, voice calm yet firm. "Before we step into court, I thought it best to review the key points here. Transparency will benefit all of us." Catherine's eyes darted to the documents, a flicker of unease crossing her face. She realized that my preparation wasn't just thorough, it was impenetrable. As I walked them through every detail, the financial discrepancies, her subtle manipulations, the inconsistencies in her statements, her attempts to interject were met with careful counterpoints. Each fact I presented dismantled her defenses. Even the small mistakes she thought insignificant were amplified, making the full picture undeniable. "What I'm showing here," I explained, "is not about revenge. It's about truth. Actions have consequences, and every attempt to mislead or manipulate only becomes part of the record." The calm, methodical tone seemed to unnerve her the most. Catherine had been used to controlling the narrative, shaping perceptions to her advantage, but here, faced with precision and patience, she could do nothing. The power she thought she had was slipping away, moment by moment. Mr. Whitman tried to intervene, offering explanations and justifications, but even his seasoned courtroom experience couldn't overshadow the clarity of the evidence laid before him. The emails, the records, the inconsistencies, they spoke louder than any argument he could make. Hours passed in this quiet intensity, each moment chiseling away at Catherine's confidence. By the time the session concluded, her posture had shifted. The arrogance that had defined her demeanor was replaced with hesitation and uncertainty. I allowed them a final glance at the documents. This is the reality we will present in court tomorrow. I suggest you consider it carefully. There's no room for improvisation or false narratives. Only facts will speak. As they left, I remained seated, reflecting on the careful planning that had led to this point. Victory wasn't about confrontation or emotion. It was about foresight, preparation, and calm execution. Every move Catherine had attempted had been anticipated, and every countermeasure had been put in place with patience and care. Lucas called, again, updating me on final arrangements and confirming that everything for the court session was in place. Tomorrow, they won't know what hit them, he said with quiet satisfaction. Exactly, I replied, feeling a sense of controlled satisfaction. Tomorrow isn't just about presenting evidence. It's about showing that no one underestimates the power of careful preparation and patience. As the evening settled, I reviewed everything one last time. Each detail, every document, every potential argument had been anticipated. Catherine's confidence was fragile now. Tomorrow, the courtroom would reveal the extent of her miscalculation. The day ended with a quiet resolve. Preparation had been the weapon of choice, and it was sharp, precise, and unyielding. I had been patient, silent, and calculated, and now the moment to act was at hand. The anticipation of tomorrow was a strange mix of tension and calm. I knew one thing for certain. When pride meets preparation, the outcome is inevitable, and tomorrow Catherine would finally see that reality, stark and undeniable. The morning of the court session arrived with an unusual calm. There was a quiet intensity in the air, the kind that precedes a storm. I reviewed my notes one last time, ensuring that every argument, every piece of evidence, every email and receipt was perfectly aligned. Lucas was already at my side, a silent pillar of support. Catherine thinks she has this in the bag, Lucas said quietly, his eyes scanning the courthouse from a distance. But she has no idea what's coming? I nodded, feeling the weight of years of preparation. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice and truth. Every manipulation, every attempt to deceive, every underhanded move Catherine had made would now be exposed. When we entered the courtroom, Catherine and Mr. Whitman were already seated, a veneer of confidence masking the tension I could sense. She smiled at me faintly, an attempt to unsettle me, but I had learned long ago that calmness and preparation are stronger than intimidation. Judge Harrison called the session to order. We are here to hear the matter concerning the divorce proceedings between Albert and Catherine, he began, his voice carrying authority. I expect clarity and honesty from all parties involved. I rose calmly, carrying the carefully prepared envelope of evidence. My voice was steady as I began. Your Honor, before we proceed, I would like to present the facts in chronological order to ensure clarity. What follows is a detailed record of communications, financial transactions, and documented behaviors that have a direct impact on the case. Catherine's eyes widened slightly, the first crack in her composed demeanor. Mr. Whitman tried to interject, but I anticipated his move. With all due respect, Your Honor, please allow me to finish presenting the full picture before counterpoints are discussed. One by one, I laid out each piece of evidence. Emails showed her attempts to manipulate finances. Receipts and transactions revealed discrepancies she had hoped would remain hidden. Her careful plans to distort the narrative were now transparent and undeniable. Throughout my presentation, the courtroom felt tense. I could sense the subtle shifts in body language, the tightening of fingers, the nervous glances exchanged between Catherine and her lawyer. They had believed themselves untouchable, but the calm, methodical delivery of facts was dismantling their strategy piece by piece. Judge Harrison listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. "This is quite detailed," he remarked. "It appears there is substantial evidence here. I will need to review these thoroughly before making a judgment." Catherine's confidence began to crumble. She had counted on emotion, charm, and ambiguity to sway the outcome, but the strength of documented truth was overwhelming. Every attempt to speak was carefully countered by evidence I had prepared in advance. Lucas whispered, "They're panicking." "You've got them exactly where you want." I simply nodded. There was no need for triumphal words. The evidence spoke for itself. Preparation, patience, and foresight had been the keys to maintaining control. Every calculated step, every anticipated move, had led to this moment. By the end of the session, it was clear that Catherine's case had been severely weakened. The judge adjourned, stating that he would review all documents and testimony thoroughly before issuing a decision. Catherine left the courtroom looking unsettled, her plan falling apart despite her attempts to maintain composure. As we exited, Lucas smiled. "You handled that perfectly. You didn't just present evidence. You dismantled their confidence completely." I allowed myself a quiet breath of satisfaction. This was not about gloating. It was about ensuring that truth prevailed. Catherine had believed she could manipulate the situation, but meticulous preparation had turned the tables. That evening, I returned home and reviewed the day in detail. Every moment, every exchange, every response from Catherine and her lawyer had confirmed that the foundation I had built was solid. The next steps would only reinforce what had already been established, that truth, when presented without haste and with careful planning, is unshakable, and so, with a calm mind and quiet confidence, I prepared for what was coming next. The storm had begun, and tomorrow would reveal just how powerful foresight and meticulous preparation can be in a world where manipulation often goes unchecked. The days leading up to the court session were tense, each one heavier than the last. Catherine maintained her usual facade of composure, but there were cracks, tiny, almost imperceptible, that only someone paying close attention could notice. Her movements were sharper, her tone sharper, her glances fleeting yet deliberate, as if calculating every interaction to maintain control. I, meanwhile, remained calm. Every morning I reviewed the evidence I had gathered, the emails, the records, the inconsistencies in her statements, all carefully organized. Lucas was my ally, offering insight and moral support. We discussed each angle, each possible objection, and planned for every potential disruption. One evening, as we were going over the documents again, Lucas remarked, "Edward, you've covered everything. She won't even know what hit her." I nodded, but inside I felt the weight of anticipation. Justice was imminent, but I had to wait for the perfect moment. The night before the hearing, Catherine's tension was palpable. I had intercepted some of her communications with Mr. Whitman. Every message betrayed a growing desperation. She was aware that the walls were closing in, that the truth was no longer something she could manipulate. I read through the final draft she had prepared, a document meant to undermine me, and I smiled quietly. Every word she had drafted to deceive only served as more evidence of her intent. The morning of the session arrived. The air was heavy with expectancy. I dressed carefully, presenting myself with the calm confidence that had carried me through this ordeal. Lucas followed, silent and vigilant. We arrived at the courthouse early, giving ourselves time to acclimate to the environment and anticipate any last-minute surprises. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. Other spectators whispered, curious about the high-profile nature of the case. Catherine and Mr. Whitman entered, her composed exterior only partially masking her anxiety. She shot me a glance, sharp and calculating, but it lacked the confidence it once held. As Judge Harrison called the session to order, I felt a quiet determination settle over me. This was the moment for all the preparation, the late nights, the meticulous planning. Every document, every detail, every strategy had been designed for this exact confrontation. When the court began, Catherine presented her opening statements with practiced poise, attempting to establish control over the narrative. But I had anticipated her every argument. With each point she made, I had counter-evidence ready, meticulously prepared to dismantle her assertions. The emails, the financial records, and even witness statements lined up perfectly, each one a testament to my careful attention to detail. Lucas whispered, "Edward, she's completely caught off guard. They can't adapt fast enough." I didn't respond. I let the court proceedings carry the momentum. I had learned long ago that patience and strategy often speak louder than words. Throughout the day, the tension in the room grew. Catherine's frustration became evident in subtle ways. A nervous tap of her pen, a faltering tone, a glance toward Mr. Whitman that sought reassurance, but found none. The facade she had relied on for so long was crumbling under the weight of undeniable truth. By the afternoon, Judge Harrison requested a brief recess to review the amassed evidence. I sat quietly, feeling the magnitude of what was about to unfold. I had navigated this complex situation with patience, precision, and foresight. But even I knew the moment of final judgment carried a weight that no planning could fully mitigate. When the session resumed, I presented the final piece of evidence, an envelope that Catherine's own words had inadvertently validated. The room fell silent as the documents were examined, the implications clear to all present. Catherine's confidence wavered visibly, her meticulous plan unraveling in real time. As I watched the realization settle over her, I understood a profound truth: preparation, foresight, and the courage to act when the moment is right can turn even the most daunting situation into victory. And in that room, as every detail I had anticipated came to fruition, I felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that justice had been served in a way that was fair, calculated, and inevitable. The session was far from over, but the momentum had shifted decisively. Catherine, once so certain of her control, now faced the stark reality that I had anticipated her every move. The next chapter would be the courtroom's final decision, and by then the truth was undeniable and the repercussions inevitable. The courtroom had been tense all morning. Every argument, every word, every gesture had been calculated and watched. I could feel Catherine's confidence waver slightly each time I remained silent, letting her claims fill the room. I was Edge, the man who had endured years of deception and manipulation, and now I was ready to tip the scales completely in my favor. When my turn came, I stood slowly, ensuring that every eye in the room turned toward me. "Your Honor," I said, my voice calm but firm, "I would like to present evidence that has not yet been considered." I handed the judge a carefully prepared folder. Inside were letters, recordings, and official documents, proof of everything Catherine had tried to hide. The courtroom murmured as the papers were examined. Even Mr. Whitman looked uneasy. He had no idea that I had been building this arsenal for months. I began speaking, detailing how every accusation Catherine had leveled against me was false or exaggerated. Each statement I made was supported by facts, recordings, or documents. The room felt heavier with each word I spoke, the air thick with tension. I could see Catherine's fingers tremble slightly as she clutched the edges of her folder. Lucas, sitting quietly in the back, gave me a subtle nod. He knew this was the moment we had worked toward, the moment that would finally reveal the truth. I felt no rush, no urgency. Patience had been my weapon, and now it was delivering its payoff. As I continued, the faces of those observing changed. Some were shocked, some were in disbelief. Catherine's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of panic and frustration. Mr. Whitman tried to interject, but I had anticipated every point he could make. My evidence was airtight, leaving no room for argument or denial. Finally, the judge spoke. Based on the documents and evidence provided, it is clear that the claims of the plaintiff are unsubstantiated. The court rules in favor of the defendant. A hush fell over the room. Catherine's lips parted, but no words came out. Her carefully constructed plan had crumbled in front of everyone. Mr. Whitman's posture stiffened. He knew that all the time and preparation he had put into this case had been for nothing. I remained seated, letting the weight of the moment settle in. This wasn't just a personal victory, it was the culmination of years of patience, careful observation, and strategic action. I had endured, I had watched, and now I had acted. The lesson was clear. Arrogance and deceit could never overcome foresight and truth. The crowd slowly started to disperse. Friends, family, and even strangers in the courtroom whispered among themselves, commenting on the unexpected outcome. Catherine's face, pale and defeated, was a picture of the reality she had ignored for far too long. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The evidence had spoken, and the truth had prevailed. Walking out of the courtroom, I felt a strange mixture of relief and quiet satisfaction. I had protected what mattered most, and the deception that had loomed over my life for so long had been exposed for all to see. Lucas followed closely behind, his expression mirroring my own sense of accomplishment. This chapter of my life, long filled with uncertainty and quiet planning, had reached its conclusion. I had won, not just in court, but in proving that careful observation, patience, and resolve could overcome even the most calculated attempts at betrayal. The world outside the courtroom felt different. The tension that had hung in the air for months was gone. I could finally breathe, knowing that the truth had been revealed and justice had been served. No dramatic speeches, no celebrations, just a quiet acknowledgement that I had done what was necessary. Edge had acted wisely and decisively. And as I stepped out into the sunlight, the weight of the past months lifted from my shoulders. The morning after the courtroom victory, I awoke feeling a strange mixture of relief and vigilance. I had won the legal battle, but I knew that Catherine's resentment and bitterness would not simply vanish overnight. My mind was already strategizing the next steps to ensure that no further chaos would seep into my life. As I entered the kitchen, Lucas was already there, sipping coffee and reviewing some papers I had left on the table. His calm demeanor was reassuring. We had been through tense moments before, but this was different. The court had ruled in my favor, yet the remnants of deception and betrayal still lingered in the corners of our world. I picked up my phone and checked the messages. Some were congratulatory, while others were from people curious about the outcome. Yet amidst the noise, there was silence from Catherine. That silence, I realized, spoke louder than any words could. She was plotting, scheming, or perhaps in disbelief at the sheer precision with which I had dismantled her plans. The first encounter of the day came sooner than expected. Catherine, with her lawyer in tow, arrived at my office unannounced. Her eyes were sharp, scanning for any signs of weakness, but I remained calm. Edge did not react hastily. I gestured for them to sit, silently acknowledging the tension in the room. "Edward," Catherine began, her voice measured but laced with irritation, "this isn't over. You may have won today, but the world isn't finished with us yet." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words hang in the air. "Catherine, today the truth was revealed. Every claim you made has been disproven, and every hidden plan you thought would work against me has failed." My voice was steady, controlled. "I suggest you take some time to reflect before making further decisions." Mr. Whitman, clearly uncomfortable, tried to interject, but I anticipated his every objection. Each statement he made was met with a calm, factual rebuttal. The balance of power in the room had shifted completely. It was clear who held control now, not through arrogance, but through strategy and meticulous preparation. Hours passed, and the day seemed to stretch endlessly. Catherine left, her demeanor a mix of frustration and silent rage. I watched her go, noting every detail. Even in her absence, the sense of triumph was tempered by the knowledge that vigilance must continue. Life had taught me that victories could be fleeting if one allowed complacency to creep in. Later that afternoon, Lucas and I reviewed the estate and financial documents, ensuring that every asset, every detail, and every contingency was accounted for, became the focus. It wasn't enough to win in court. The peace and security of my life required thorough planning and foresight. I walked through the house, each room filled with memories of trials, laughter, and past tensions. The walls seemed to echo the quiet victories, the silent battles I had endured. Edge had survived the storm, but the storm's remnants lingered like shadows, reminding me of the careful balance required to maintain control. By evening, I found myself sitting in the study, reflecting on the journey. The legal battle had been won, but the personal lessons were even more profound. Patience, vigilance, and precise action were the tools that had safeguarded my world. I understood now that revenge, when executed with clarity and patience, was not about destruction. It was about restoration, about reclaiming the life and respect that had been challenged. A sudden knock on the door broke my thoughts. It was Lucas, holding an envelope. No words were exchanged. The weight of understanding hung between us. I opened it to find documents confirming that all previous attempts to manipulate or threaten my assets had been nullified. Every step I had taken to secure my position was now officially reinforced. Night descended slowly, the house quiet and calm. I stood by the window, gazing at the fading light. Edward had endured trials, navigated deception, and emerged victorious. The world outside seemed ordinary, yet inside, a quiet storm of calculated resilience had concluded its course. As I turned away from the window, I felt the satisfaction of knowing that the battles I had fought, both public and private, had been won not through force, but through patience, intelligence, and unwavering determination. The days ahead promised challenges, but for the first time in a long while, I felt prepared to face them without fear. Edge had learned that power was not measured by dominance or aggression, but by foresight, strategy, and an unyielding commitment to truth. And with that understanding, I moved forward, knowing that the peace I had secured was built on a foundation no deception could shake. The morning light crept through the blinds, casting long shadows across the study. I knew today would be decisive. Edward had endured trials, betrayals, and manipulations, but now everything was coming full circle. I turned to Lucas, who gave me a reassuring nod. Together, we had navigated every obstacle, and the final step was now at hand. Catherine's phone call had been predictable. She demanded one last meeting, her voice filled with false confidence. She thought she could intimidate me, sway decisions, or retrieve what she believed was hers. But Edward had learned the ultimate lesson. Patience and strategy always trump arrogance. As she entered, I remained calm. Every glance, every calculated step, every detail of preparation had led to this moment. I handed her a folder, neatly arranged, containing documents she would never have anticipated. Her eyes widened, her smile faltered. The power she thought she wielded was gone. "I suggest you read this carefully," I said, my tone measured yet sharp. "Every claim, every threat, every attempt at manipulation has been nullified. Your plans, your intentions, and your schemes have been dismantled." Mr. Whitman shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearly aware that the ground beneath them had shifted irrevocably. Catherine's composure faltered, her arguments became weak, and her confidence evaporated. Edward didn't raise a voice. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself, and it spoke loudly. After she left, Lucas and I reviewed the documents again. Every asset, every agreement, every protection measure was now secured. Edward's world was finally stable. He had reclaimed his life, his peace, and his dignity. The months of preparation, the long hours of silent strategizing, and the careful observation of every move had all paid off. Night fell. The house was quiet, the city outside bustling, unaware of the personal victory within these walls. I stood by the window, reflecting on the journey. Edward had faced deceit, treachery, and manipulation. Yet through patience, foresight, and unwavering resolve, he had turned the tide completely in his favor. Friends, the most important lesson here is this: life will test you, people will betray you, and circumstances will seem impossible. But when you combine intelligence with patience and act with precision, you reclaim what is rightfully yours. Edward's story is proof that real power lies in strategy, restraint, and understanding the human heart. Now I ask you, if you were in a similar position, would you act rashly, or would you plan carefully and reclaim your life with dignity? Tell me in the comments below, where are you watching from? Your thoughts matter, and I want to hear them. Before you leave, here's a small request. If this story moved you, hit the like button, share it with friends, and don't forget to subscribe to Mind Sweet Revenge for more jaw-dropping, real-life inspired stories.